Moms who know do less so they can focus on what matters most, taking care of themselves, their families, and living their God-given purpose. Moms who know focus on the little things they can do that grow to have a huge impact. You are connecting with your family, your true self, and your God-given purpose. You are a mom who knows. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of the Moms Who Know podcast. I'm your host, Chanel Nielsen, and I'm joined today by my husband, James, for another episode of Couples Who Know. So today we're going to talk about 3 mindset shifts that really can be powerful in changing your marriage and making things better and in helping you to just have a different and more positive outlook. So to start off, I'm going to start us off today. The first one is acknowledging the difference between the masculine and the feminine. I read a really great email. This is from Stacy Martino, and I'm just going to quote a part of this because she shares a story that I think is really powerful. She said this, "I just think maybe I married the wrong person for me. I hear that a lot, and Carrie was no different. She struggled wondering if maybe her hubby just wasn't the right partner for her. She wanted a real partner in marriage, and no matter how much she tried to get him to be partners with her, it just wasn't working. As he would say, that's just not me." Carrie was so unhappy and so worried. What was she going to do? Even her partner was telling her that he just wasn't the kind of guy that she wanted him to be. Should she just end it? Should she settle and stay for the kids? Was she being crazy to want a real partner in marriage, parenting, the house, in life? How could she stay with someone that just wasn't right for her? I listened to Carrie and asked some questions about what was actually going on. I dug a little deeper on what a real partner meant to her. I asked for more specifics on what her partner actually said to her. What did I find? Well, Carrie, like so many women, was on the verge of making a huge mistake. What did having a real partner mean for Carrie? Someone to grow with, someone who listens to her, someone who can lead with the kids, make decisions with her about the house, travel with her, read books, and share what they learned. Someone to cook with, who would support her, understand her, share the burden, have fun together, talk about things. There was a lot more on that list, actually. That's the short version. There is a huge mistake here. Do you see it yet? A lot of what she describes that she wants in a real partner is her describing a woman, and her husband is a guy, so that's kind of a non-starter. A lot of women do this. A lot. They get upset with their husbands because their husbands don't interact with them the way another woman would. The masculine and feminine are completely different. They are equal, of course, but they are not the same. But since we never get a real relationship education, we get upset, frustrated, and offended when our partner responds to us in a way that we would never. You can swap your partner out for another one, but you're going to run into a lot of the same stuff. Okay, I like that story a lot because it really highlights the difference between the masculine and feminine. Sometimes when we have issues or concerns in our marriage, it's because we're actually looking for something in our partner that we're never going to find. And as women, we're looking for what we can only get from another woman.
I really like that email too. And I think that it can be so true to really think about what this person was wanting and to dissect it enough to know that what she was really wanting was like her husband to be almost like a girlfriend to her. Now, in thinking about this, I think that men can step up to some of these things. We can help fulfill some of these desires and wishes. But I just think that it's helpful for women to know that, hey, there are some big differences here. And sometimes guys to get in touch with our feminine side a little bit maybe, right? And help fulfill some of these desires and dreams.
Totally. I just want to interject there. Like, I don't think this is a cop-out to say like, oh, well, your husband's a man, so he's never going to talk to you, and you should just plan on that. But it's a really good mindset shift of like, oh, my husband is a man. It's going to be a little different than my relationships with my girlfriends.
Absolutely. And with that, just knowing that for, hey, men and for women, you can help realize that. Once you realize that, I think that it will help because you can say, hey, okay, I'm going to intentionally try to do this for my spouse. They would like a cooking partner, so I'm going to do that. That's something we've been talking about actually lately.
Yes.
A little bit in our marriage, like how we can make that work a little bit better. But so yeah, great points. Anything else you wanted to add to that?
No.
Okay, so good. I'm going to introduce another thought here along with this same thing. And I'll give you guys a background story here to this. Chanel and I did a marriage symposium. This is years ago, where we had several classes that we could choose from, right? So we helped head this up, and the participants could choose from several different classes, right? And there was these classes, and they had different names to them. And one of the classes was named Oops. Go ahead, please.
Before you say that name, say what the other classes were named.
Oh, help me remember.
They were things like communication.
Okay, yeah.
What were finances, budgeting. I mean, those are the same, but
pretty basic stuff,
like
right?
One word, really simple, not super fun sounding classes.
I'm glad that you had me say that. So yeah, this person that was actually putting on this class that I'll reveal the name of in a second here, really he was adamant that this be the name of the class. And the name was Oops, She Married a Man. And it's funny because you think about it like, oh, what's that going to be all about? And I think that was the most popular class.
It was,
right?
Yeah. That got the most attendees, and I think they had to turn people away from that class because would you rather go to one called Finances or Oops, She Married a Man?
And it was a fun class, and the presenter was pointing out that, look, this is who you married, and not in a sense that, hey, you're stuck with this and so live with it, but it's just in recognizing the difference between the sexes. And so I really like that. That stuck with me and us. And I think it's really important to remember we're different and that we can appreciate those differences, and that's okay.
Yeah. So one way that men and women are really different is in our communication. And this comes from Deborah Tannen. She calls sharing personal information rapport talk. And women favor rapport talk. They favor talking to each other to build connection. We are just sharing. I went on a walk with a friend this morning, and we're just talking about, life and Christmas and our kids and just everything that's going on, just to build that connection. Men favor what's called report talk. They want to share more impersonal information and just, what's going on and not getting quite as deep. It's like, here's where I'm going to go and this is what's happening. And it's a little bit different. It's information for a point, a little bit more than with women.
Just to relate to that, it's so funny, I'll try to take myself out of a conversation with a bunch of guys and observe, like be the silent observer for a minute. And guys can get together and have like these conversations, especially revolving around sports, right? And so it's just this sharing of information. And like, yeah, well, this guy, like, we'll just share stats and what we've read about already. Like, guys like to do that, right? So it shows that we know what's going on. But to that point, that's information sharing. Totally. And doing that, guys bond. Like, that's okay. Yeah. Like, this guy knows about my team. And so it's just funny, and I like to observe that because I think it's true and I see myself do it. And I think it's important to recognize what Chanel's point was there.
Definitely. All right. Number 2, James is going to talk a little bit about this one. Choose the stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah. So found a really helpful research tip here, and I'm just going to read this to you guys. It says, while the human brain receives 11 million pieces of information every second from our environment, it can process only 40 bits per second, which means it has to choose what tiny percentage of this input to process and attend to, and what huge chunk to dismiss or ignore. Thus, your reality is a choice. What you choose to focus on shapes how you perceive and interpret your world. So with that introductory line there, we choose the stories we tell ourselves. This is an important one to recognize as well. And I think you can go down so many rabbit holes with this. And what I mean by that is you can get stuck telling yourself, for an example, oh my gosh, if I do this, my wife's going to get mad at me, and she's going to be mad at me no matter what, or he's going to be mad at me no matter what. And they just get mad at this, fill in the blank. And I think there's a huge danger in that, right? Because there's a lot to process, right? 11 million pieces of information every second in our environment. Wow. Well, there's so much thought process there, and we're only able to choose a tiny percentage of this input. So why not focus on the positive and focus on the good rather than dwelling on this story that we tell ourselves that a lot of times is not true? So I invite you to really ponder that. What story am I telling myself about my spouse? So just take a brief minute just to think about that. And it might be a negative story. Maybe some of you are thinking about positive things. What story am I telling my spouse? That story that you tell yourself really affects the interaction and the relationship that you have with your spouse every day. I really believe that. And so if you're focused on something that is negative, if I do this, then this, and it's a negative thing, or she'll freak out or he'll freak out about this, really, I think that that's going to manifest itself and come true because of your thought process.
I totally agree. I think that when we believe something, our brains, we like to be right, and our brains look for evidence to prove us right.
I know you like to be right.
We, the human race, like to be right.
We like to be right. I do.
And I also like to be right. But anyway, we do. We like to be right. So if we say, oh, my husband's going to be mad at me for doing this, and then he gives us a sideways glance, we're like, oh, see,
right.
He's mad. And we're just very quick to interpret it that way. So it really does matter how we, that story that we tell ourselves. I don't want to get myself in trouble here. So some unnamed sources. I have a friend who once told me that her husband didn't do anything around the house. And that's the story that she told herself. And then not too long after, one of her children told me that her dad, so this woman's husband, actually makes dinner 2 or 3 nights a week. And I thought, isn't that interesting? The story that she's telling herself is that he doesn't do anything around the house and that she has to do a lot of it herself. But if James made dinner 2 or 3 nights a week, I think I'd fall over in shock and surprise. And yet the story I'm telling myself
wait a minute, I know how to make dinner,
is that he is doing a lot around the house, maybe not making dinner.
It's true. It's so true. I like that example. That's really a really good example.
Yeah, because I'm not sitting here being bitter about the fact that you're not making dinner or saying, oh, he's not making dinner, he's not doing anything around the house. He's doing a lot to help out, but not actually making dinner, which is a different story that we won't get into right now. But anyway, it really comes down to what story are you telling yourself about what's going on, because there's so many different ways to perceive it. I have a couple other really interesting ways that we do this. So one of them is called unconscious overclaiming. What this means is this is a scientific term that means we unconsciously overestimate our contributions or skills relative to other people. And there's an interesting study done where students in a work group each said they took them aside individually and said, what percentage of the work did you do in this group? Mm-hmm. And they each gave their estimate of their own percentage. Well, when they added them up, the total was 139%. So everyone is way overestimating the work that they do.
So interesting, yeah.
It makes sense when you think about it, right? Because you only see the work that you do. You don't see all the other things that people are doing, including your spouse. You don't see the wrapper that was on the floor and now isn't there because your spouse came and picked it up.
I'm remembering when I felt like, this was recent, I was working really hard around the house and doing something, and I had asked you, like, well, what were you doing? Do you remember this?
No.
And I didn't say it like that. I was like, oh, like, woe is me. I was doing all this stuff, and I was pointing out the things kind of that I was doing, but the story I was telling myself was, I'm working really hard, and my wife's like taking it easy. And I wasn't mad at her for that, but I was like wanting to be recognized for that. But look, what was she doing? And then you actually told me some of the things you're doing. Darn it, I wish I could remember what that was. But you told me all this stuff that you had been doing, not like in a defensive, I did this and this and this while you were doing this. But it was later, and you told me what you're doing. I was like, oh, like she wasn't just sitting around doing nothing while I was working. And wow, that was a big lesson to me, right? If we can just slow down for a minute and and give our spouse the benefit of the doubt and maybe tell that story to ourselves a little bit differently.
Totally. And I think even sometimes when your spouse is sitting there, I have to choose the story. Like if I'm sitting there and making dinner and James is sitting on the couch reading or whatever, hanging out with the kids, I can still choose the story I tell myself, which is generally this. He's been at work all day, and I get to take little breaks throughout the day when he's going at work. And so the story that I choose to tell myself is he is allowed to take this break right now, and he deserves to take this break. And that's a lot better story than, oh, look at him sitting on the couch while I slave away in the kitchen. And it is a conscious choice that we get to do. And I just want to add in here too, for anyone who thinks that sounded really unfair, after dinner, I sit on the couch and read my book, and James sweeps the floor and the kids do their kitchen cleanup. So it all works out. Okay, one other thing that I think is really interesting along these lines is called the fundamental attribution error. Now this has to do, again, with choosing the story that we tell ourselves. What this is we tend to view other people's actions as reflections of their characters and overlook the power of situation to influence their actions. So that is a fancy way of saying that when we see other people do something, we say, oh, that's because they're a bad person. So the example that I love of this is like if someone cuts you off in traffic, you think, oh, that jerk, they don't know how to drive. But if you cut off someone else in traffic, you're like, oh, I didn't realize you were so close and I'm so sorry. And, oh, I'm a good person, but it was just an accident. And this idea that we can apply this to our spouse is when our spouse does something that we don't like, that injures us, that, offends us, we can do this to them and give them the benefit of the doubt. Choose that nicer story. Choose to say, oh, they're hungry. Oh, they're having a rough day, and make up a little story for them, just like you would in your own mind for yourself.
Oh, I really like that, because that traffic story that you told is really applicable. I can relate to that. And so, because I do that, hopefully not a lot, but I've done that in the past where I feel like that act that they did was unjustified when I'm not putting myself in their position, because I've done that before. So, wow, what a shift in the way that you think, in the way that things could turn out if you can just focus on the good, and like Chanel was saying, giving the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, which leads us to number 3 mindset shift, which actually is to actively focus on the good. So this comes from a study that was done, and it's really interesting. I'm going to read a little paragraph here of this study. So it says the researchers used an eye tracking machine to literally track and record everything our eyes and thus our brains are focusing on. They found that when people were in a negative mindset, their attention was focused mostly on what was in the center of the computer screen. When people with a more positive orientation looked at that screen, however, their range of vision expanded to include the entire picture rather than just 1 or 2 pieces of information in the center. So it goes on to say that if you're more positive, you're literally going to see more of what's going on. And if you're more negative, you're just focused on that negative piece and you miss a lot of the information. It's really interesting.
Isn't there some facts too that it takes how many positive experiences to overcome a negative?
Yes. Okay. So John Gottman, that's out of the Gottman Research Institute, says that when you have a negative interaction, it takes 5 positive interactions to offset that.
So true. And I was thinking about an experience that we just recently had with that on a date night. And this was a night that wasn't going so well, not going as planned. We had a rough start to getting to this date. I had probably done something that was not very smart. I forget what it was. Oh, I think I remember.
It could very well have been me, but you're not.
Yeah. So I remember. But anyway, it just got off to a rough start. And so focusing on that bad, negative thing and getting off to this rough start, it took a while for us to get back on track for this date to happen. Right. And I think it was probably about 5 positive experiences. We had taken a break, come back, regrouped, talked. I think that I had done some actions to show that I was ready to go. And it just helped broaden the picture rather than focus on that negative thing, that point.
Well, research shows that it's actually so much easier for us to focus on the negative. Our minds have what's called a negativity bias, and it shows that our reactions to bad events are stickier, they say, than our reactions to good events. So we are like programmed to remember the negative and to, just have this come to our mind more easily, more readily. And so we have to work to get over that. We have to work to actively focus on the good, and it can be hard to do.
It absolutely can. I wish it wasn't so sometimes, right? Like,
Yeah.
why is it so much easier to remember this negative? But I think that if you're aware of it, you can definitely have an easier time overcoming it. So just to wrap it up, I want to go over these points again that we made here. And it is to choose the stories we tell ourselves, acknowledge the difference between masculine and feminine, and actively focus on the good. And I hope and invite you guys to do those things and to really put it into practice and stop yourself when you're maybe telling yourself a story that could be changed, and see what the outcome can bring.
Totally. I think that when we get our head in the game for marriage, when we shift these things in our own mind, it's only going to help. And then what it does for us is it frees us up a little bit from being reactive on the actions of our spouse. It's taking things into your own hands and saying, okay, I choose to look at things a different way. I choose to acknowledge that my husband's a man. I choose the stories. I choose to focus on the good. And that gives you so much freedom because you're getting to choose those things. So my question for you today is, what one little thing are you going to do differently or think about differently because of what you've heard today? Let me know on Facebook or Instagram at Moms Who Know Podcast. And as always, be sure, if you like this, to share it with a friend or leave a review. Those are both super helpful. And we'll see you next time on Moms Who Know.